Have you ever imagined waking up one day and realizing that everything you believed in, your honor, your family, your future, was ripped away from you in the blink of an eye? I know it sounds like a nightmare, but this story is real, at least for those who lived every second of it in hell behind bars. Today, you will discover how an honest man was forced to prove his innocence with his life, while the system that promised justice became his worst prison. Get ready to see the darkest side of the judicial system and feel firsthand the pain and anger of someone who was thrown into the deep end. The invisible trap from the moment the accusation fell upon him. Everything went up in smoke. A distant voice in court, a police officer convinced of his mistake, and there he was, an ordinary citizen with no prior record, now in the crosshairs of a rape accusation. No one saw the moment the trap closed, forged evidence, combined witnesses, an overworked lawyer who didn't even read the case. He could hardly believe it. The life he had led, with friends, work and plans, had crumbled into a stamped order. 1 second, someone concluded that he was guilty. The next, the doors closed behind his footsteps, and the only thing left was the echo of his screams of despair. And it was on that cold afternoon that he heard the click of the lock. It wasn't just metal banging, it was the sound of a sealed fate, with no way back. The silence screamed the first night in. The cell was a separation of souls, dim lights, iron bars, the smell of sweat mixed with anguish. He huddled in a corner, trying to understand how they could have ripped off his citizen's name and turned it into a registration number. Each step taken by the jailers was a hammer blow to his sanity. Outside, the world went on. Inside, time dragged on in drops of liquid fear. The jailer's voice announcing the closing of the bars sounded like a death sentence. There was no accusation to be discussed. There was no defense to be heard. There was only that muffled scream that echoed in his chest, asking for help from a mute system. And, when the dawn deepened, he realized that freedom was not at his door, it was a lie away. The nightmare in the darkness, when they thought that the master of the cell could no longer be vulnerable, a macabre ritual unfolded. They call it baptism. 60 prisoners crossed the cold concrete corridor and, like hungry shadows, invaded his space. He was dragged by brute force, with no chance of defense, without even understanding the real motivation. Each second became an eternity of horror, sounds of bones clashing, pleas for mercy, and the clear perception that, there, no one would see him as an innocent man, but only as bait, a trophy of courage or weakness in the raw. When the wave of violence stopped, he discovered that not only had he been physically violated, but that the most serious wound would exist forever in his memory. And it was at that moment that he realized this was not about punishment for a crime committed, but torture by the confines of an unjust prison. As his body bled inside and the walls seemed to laugh at his despair, a single thought struck him: what if I die here and no one finds out my truth? The cold blade of loneliness stabbed into his mind. At that moment, the prison stopped being a place of detention and became a living tomb. And he, a man destined to fight against real and forged ghosts. If this story has made your heart freeze so far, leave an "I'm here" in the comments. I want to know, do you believe that justice can really become the greatest executioner of those it should protect? The hidden wound when the sun sets and the lights in the courtyard go out. He closes his eyes and sees the marks of the bones pressing against his skin, the heat of fear burning every inch of his body. The physical pain is just the beginning. The worst is about to reveal itself. In the silence of the night, he feels the internal wound burning. His insides ask impossible questions. Why did they do this to me? His mind goes back to the hours before the attack, trying to find justification in a labyrinth with no way out. But there is no explanation. It was not revenge from a gang rival, nor a gambling debt, just the gratuitous brutality of those who see innocent people as easy prey. Each step he takes through the improvised infirmary is a journey inside his own flesh. Each breath, a reminder that the traitor's body bears scars that the heart never forgets. In the darkness of this chapter, the camera follows the contour of his back, revealing tattoos that once told stories of hope, now streaked with red and purple ink, memories of a real nightmare. And when he whispers, almost choking, "No one deserves this," the tone is not of weakness, but of contained fury. the kind that springs from the depths of his soul and gives him the strength to keep breathing. The death touch days later, that same body that resisted physical violence receives a diagnosis that crushed any semblance of normality: HIV positive. The doctor's words come cold, inescapable. The test confirmed the presence of the virus. This is not a discussion about guilt or innocence. It is about the contamination of a man who no longer has anything except his own life as proof of innocence. He remembers the rough touch of the attackers, the feeling of total invasion, but he could never have predicted that an invisible predator would take up residence there, ready to corrode his cells and his future. The ward echoes with the murmur of the other inmates, some curious, others indifferent. He feels the stigma circulating in the eyes of those who read HIV as a social death sentence. And at that moment, the prison becomes an isolation center for a disease that still carries guilt on the shoulders of others. The antiretroviral arrives in measured doses, distributed among sealed vials, each pill a silent reminder of how many days he may have left to live. The virus multiplies inside him like silent revenge, while the system that should be offering treatment is slow to respond with the urgency that the situation demands. They took everything from me, he thinks, even the hope of a healthy future. But it is in this abyss that a trace of resistance emerges, the certainty that it will not be enough to fall to one's knees. One must fight. The fall into loneliness. The empty corridors of the medical wing are echoes of despair. Without any real friends among the inmates, everyone avoids the contaminated one. He walks with his head held high, but his heart sinks in loneliness. Each step makes the cement floor sound loud as the voices in his head asking if he will have the courage to face courts, evidence, lawyers, when he barely has the strength to look in the mirror. In his cell, the sound of the lamp buzzing lulls him into dark thoughts. Outside, the news reports cases of dangerous inmates. Here inside, the most dangerous of them seems to be himself, carrying a virus that, for many, is still a stigma. He tries to write letters to his family, to the courts, to his own conscience, but the words get jumbled up in tears. Innocence becomes a dead witness in the internal court that inhabits his mind. The emptiness of the cell repeats. You failed to protect yourself. You are condemned twice, by the crime and by the disease. And at the height of solitude, there is a subtle, almost imperceptible turn. Feeling alone turns into fuel. The same darkness that drowns him becomes fertile ground for an inner fire. He realizes that if he lets despair take him over, there will be no memorial left for his truth. Isolation becomes a forge. There, in solitude, he decides to gather strength to rebuild his defense, body, mind, and spirit, even when everything seems to conspire against him. From here on, we will see how forged documents and a compromised system become the key to his salvation, and how contained fury awakens the tireless search for the truth. In the next block, we will delve into the revelation of the innocent and see the dirty game of those who should protect. The revelation of the innocent when he finally gets his hands on the case files. He feels his heart racing like a war drum, pages marked with dates and stamps, testimonies copied by hand, evidence ripped out without explanation. That's when the truth begins to shine like a shard of dawn in the darkness. Among hundreds of pages, an almost imperceptible note reveals the sabotage. His lawyer, exhausted and overwhelmed by external pressure, never included the report that proved his innocence. The document, signed by a renowned expert, simply disappeared, and with it, his hope of a fair trial. In a chilling cold, he recalls the interrogation sessions in which the police chief smiled as he served him cold coffee, the knowing looks between judges and witnesses who confessed to having been forged. Each page he tears from the dossier, a silent cry against the chain of silence that suffocated him. That man who entered prison in fear now clings to a flame of indignation, the certainty that, if nothing is done, his name will never be restored, and he will never leave this steel tube alive without fighting tooth and nail. And it is in this moment of awakened fury that we begin to understand the greatest weapon of those who oppress is a well-told lie, and the greatest defense of those who suffer is the truth that insists on coming to light. The contained anger revolt boils inside, but he knows that losing control would be fatal. In accounts written in shaky handwriting, he begins to record every detail, dates, names, absurd contradictions. The letters are sent to family members and independent newspapers, like stones thrown against walls of silence. With each written word, his fist grows stronger, and the pain turns into protest. But the prison has ears and eyes in every corner. Guards patrol his letters, tear open marked envelopes, and return blank pages. Even so, copies reach human rights lawyers, prompting phone calls to restless judges. In the cold quarters, he hears the rumor that the case will be reopened, but he knows that this promise could be both redemptive and another trap too. By time, on a moonless dawn, he writes out loud, almost as if he were confessing, "They wanted to silence me, but they didn't know that a letter could be a bomb." And, for a split second, he feels the power of his own words, capable of bending the system that once crushed him. When the press alternates between defamatory headlines and reports of missing evidence, the cell shakes, cellmates whisper, guards exchange glances. The fear of retaliation grows, but now shared by those who help silence him. It is the first crack in the prison's facade, and he knows that, from gaps, holes are created through which he can escape. If this fight for the truth makes your blood boil, leave a comment saying, "I will not be silent." I want to see if your voice also echoes in the darkness that tries to silence us. In the next block, we will delve into the survival ritual and learn about the extreme strategies he developed to resist, not only physically, but also mentally. While he waited for the chance to finally expose the farce that imprisoned him, the survival ritual, when the day arrives, he already knows that prison does not forgive weakness. Every ray of sunlight that enters through the bars is a reminder that there is no mercy or forgiveness there, only survival strategies. He observes the faces of the other inmates. Each expression reveals secrets of those who have crossed lines that he never imagined crossing. That is how he learned the language of whispers, combinations of silent codes to ask for help, warn about cruel guards, or avoid traps set by other prisoners. He creates a circuit of small favors, relieving a colleague's fever, passing part of his reaction to someone who is weaker, and, in exchange, receives close surveillance when he needs to leave a cell contaminated by an internal mafia. He also discovers that, if he appears too injured, he will be punished with isolation or beatings disguised as discipline. Thus, each bruise is disguised with old blankets, and each night of fever is overcome with sips of cold water. In the silence of the stones, he becomes a master at dissimulating pain, transforming suffering into armor. But the cruelest ritual of all is the one he himself invents. Before going to sleep, he mentally revisits every step of the prosecution process, the lawyer's mistakes, the forged evidence, the contradictions in the investigation. It is the only way to ensure that the truth remains alive in his mind, so that he does not succumb to the forced amnesia that the prison tries to impose. On a windy night, he hears knocking on the door. An inmate whispers that a rumor has spread that an independent report will air that very morning, exposing the case of a man infected by gang rape. The entire courtyard stops. The survival ritual, then, is no longer just about keeping the body alive, but preparing the ground for the explosion of a truth that can shake the foundations of the system. The call for truth shortly after curfew, the television in the infirmary crackles, and a reporter's voice invades the prison space. Blurred images, excerpts from an interview with a cellmate, and documents pointing to procedural sabotage. Each sentence spoken by the journalist echoes like a hammer hitting the iron doors. Innocent, violated, infected. He clenches his fists. On the other side of the walls, the contained outrage of the spectators begins to leak onto social media, turning the case's hashtag into a trend. In the cell, discreet listeners comment, "If it's true, this man deserves justice." The simple act of seeking the truth becomes a collective cry that gains strength with each retweet and share. He writes a final letter to the reporter, "I saw your program. If it's really you, promise me you'll continue." He signs it with a smear of smudged ink, the last act of faith in the one who could be his channel of salvation. The letter crosses the prison walls, hidden in an empty toothpaste tube, and reaches the free world. If this search for truth inspired you, leave "I won't shut up" in the comments to show that you're with him in this dark fight. In the next block, we will witness the wounded phoenix, the provisional return to freedom, marked by marks on the body and soul. but also by the inextinguishable fire of those who do not surrender, and then the liberating truth, where the final tribunal exposes the entire farce. The wounded phoenix, the sunlight that shines through the courthouse courtyard is not enough to warm his scarred body. When he temporarily leaves, he staggers along the same sidewalk where he once dreamed of happy endings. His gaze finds familiar faces, family members, lawyers, journalists, but something in him has changed forever. Each step carries the pain of the lash in his body, the scars in his soul, and the weight of being seen as that man from the dark case. He raises his head, takes a deep breath, and realizes that, even though he is wounded, he has been reborn. The voices that once called him a monster now whisper innocent, a word so simple, so late, that it sprouts like a seed in arid soil. At home, the mirror almost rejects him. His body has lost weight, the dark circles under his eyes betray sleepless nights, and his chest bears tattoos that now signify pain. But, deep in his eyes, there is a new glow, that of someone who has survived his own death. He breathes for the first time, without bars around him, feeling the wind on his skin and hearing sounds that were previously forbidden. Birdsong, children laughing in the park, music playing in the distance. Each sound is a reminder that life goes on and that the battle is far from over. He visits the lawyer, holds out the dossier of forged evidence, and observes the defender's eyes, now full of guilt and determination. This has to go through to the end, he says, his voice hoarse but firm. The promise of justice takes shape in appeal plans, interviews with witnesses who are now willing to speak, and, above all, in the certainty that he will no longer give in to fear. The liberating truth. The courtroom resounds with the force of the truth being revealed. Witnesses confess under oath that they never saw him at the crime scene. Experts explain how reports were tampered with. Even the police chief admits to errors in the chain of command. The audience is divided between looks of astonishment and shivers of collective guilt. And, in the center of this hurricane, he raises what is left of his voice, tired, but unbeatable. The judge, after weeks of hearings, falls silent for a long time before banging his gavel. I declare the sentence null and void. You are acquitted due to insufficient evidence and blatant procedural sabotage. A roar of emotion fills the room. The gavel echoes like a bell of freedom, and he lets out a tear that carries the weight of each unjust day. It is not just his acquittal, it is the verdict against a flawed system, a cry of warning so that no one else gets lost in the gears of injustice. Outside the courtroom, flashes record the moment. He raises his arm, triumphant, as if he wanted to touch the sky for the first time. But, when he looks down, he finds a medical bracelet still attached to his wrist, reminding him that the fight against the virus continues. A victory in court does not heal internal scars, but it signals that no one, not even the most violent failure of the system, can erase the truth of those who refuse to remain silent. This is the story of a man who faced the worst that humanity and justice could offer, and yet rose from the ashes of a farce. If this journey of pain, revolt, and redemption touched you, leave a comment saying truth above all and share it so that more people know. Hope only fades when we stop fighting.